Welcome to WSLR 96.5 LP-FM WBPV in Bradenton 100.1 LP-FM. This is the Peace and Justice Report. My name is Bob Connors.
And we have a great guest this morning. This morning, our first guest is Martin Johnson. Martin has written a new book, The Atheist Survival Guide, 35 Ways to Combat Religious Intolerance. Martin is also the author of the sci-fi thriller Jerusalem Syndrome. He's a cradle atheist, as in born, never changed. He's been that way all his life. He's a medieval historian, former Western civilization and a United States history college instructor, and 20-year cybersecurity veteran in Silicon Valley. He's traveled globally, and we can talk about that. Globally, exploring various religions, saying that he has observed both the beauty and the clarity of their adherents, but also their narrow-mindedness and brutality. So traveling the world is a great way to educate yourself, of course. So welcome, Martin. Thanks for joining our show.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And tell me, first of all, how you came to be an atheist.
Well, people come to atheism for a lot of different reasons. I mean, some people spend a lifetime of education, really looking into it. If you look at, on average, atheists tend to have a much greater understanding of theology and religion than many religionists do. And so, a lot of people come to it from that end, particularly being, potentially being religious, before they become atheists. Others come, to atheism after a lifetime of abuse. And I don't just mean sexual abuse. I mean, you could be, LGBTQ and, be ostracized by the church. Sure. You could be a woman who whose husband divorces her, and all of a sudden she's blamed for the breakup, and, ultimately decide, hey, the church is not for me. I've been very lucky. I was born into a family where which is very much indifferent to religion, which really allowed me to, explore religion or non-belief from an academic standpoint from a very early age. And you had kind of mentioned, my background. I did spend years studying medieval history and religion. I did live in Israel. I lived in Europe and was able to kind of experience a lot of different religions. Same thing with traveling in the Far East. And through all of those experiences, never was I, found that there was any reason to believe in the existence of God,
right, or
existence of a deity. And ultimately, that's the only thing that really defines an atheist. That is, none of the arguments in favor of a deity have convinced you,
right?
And if you look at anything else, people think that, atheism is an ideology. It's a religion in and of itself, but there's no real belief system that goes along with being atheist. That being said, from my standpoint, when you reject God or reject religion in particular, there should be a number of kind of questions that come up in your mind. That is, what does that mean in terms of kind of my overall belief system? Right. A lot of beliefs are really based on religion. You think about homophobia. You think about the right for a woman to have bodily autonomy, or at least the fight against that. A lot of those types of beliefs really can't be supported by anything other than religion. And it's for an atheist myself. You do kind of an inventory of your belief system and jettison those that are not necessarily supported by logic and science. At least that's for me. And the other side of that too, being an atheist, is that it's not just us. In this environment where we see Christian nationalism and religious and I use the word religio nationalism more broadly, because this is a global phenomenon, that we really have to look at supporting those that I consider atheist adjacent. You think about, there's those that are just, hey, I'm kind of a white bread American, but I'm atheist. But there's a lot of people that are also atheists that are LGBTQ, that are BIPOC, that are women, or other groups that otherwise would see themselves oppressed under atheism. I mean, under religio-fascism or Christian nationalism. And we really have to kind of be cognizant of that. And I think the other thing is that, as a white man, I haven't really experienced a hell of a lot in terms of oppression. A lot of these other groups that intersect with atheism have. And it's basically a great learning opportunity for us to learn how to deal with oppression under extreme circumstances.
Okay, so the title of your book is 35 Ways to Combat Religious Intolerance, which not only atheists, but everybody who cares in the way we do about people want to combat religious intolerance. So what inspired you to write the book at this time? And is it about the upcoming election, about Trump? What inspired you to start this project?
Well, all of that. I mean, like I said, this is a global phenomenon. If you look at kind of the rise of Christian nationalism, nationalism, you have Orban in Hungary, you have Turkey, you have India with the rise of Hindutva, you have Russia, you have a lot of these countries that are unfortunately providing a roadmap for the MAGA Republicans to transform the U.S. into something very similar. An election is kind of pivotal to that. I know that if you talk to politicians and pundits, they all say, "Well, this is the most important election in our history." That is, this is a decision between democracy and authoritarianism and autocracy, and I think that's part of it. But this is much more of a potentially intellectually transformative election,
yes,
where we're not just looking at authoritarianism, but we're really looking at religious authoritarianism. Particularly, because if you look at a lot of the religiously driven authoritarian regimes now, again, India, Hungary, Turkey, those religions tend to be a little bit less, how should I say, animated or politicized than American Christianity. And, the potential is for us to, be transformed into maybe a zombie democracy, which is what you see in Turkey or Hungary, where you still have elections, but you have a charismatic strongman leading a populist movement, pushing organized, pushing in part traditionalism and kind of politicized religion. In the U.S., we could easily see ourselves that way. We could even see much more extreme versions of that. Not necessarily a theocracy like Iran, but definitely almost I don't want to say Handmaid's Tale situation. Hopefully without the government-sanctioned rape. Although, knowing Trump's background, that's not necessarily a given. But again, American religion, because it's based, at least in terms of the power centers, are radicalized, very right-wing Catholicism and evangelicalism that runs the gamut, from integralism on the Catholic side to dominionism on kind of the evangelical side. That's pretty powerful stuff in terms of trying to gain control over every aspect of American society.
Well, yeah, you talk about religio-fascism, and it's on the rise here, I think, in Florida and elsewhere. The kind of control over women's bodies and what we read and what we can say and so forth. Do you see that as a something that can increase, and it threatens not only atheists, but it threatens all of. And the other thing I want to bring up is, of course, I know some Christians who are not that way, who are mostly gay churches and all sorts of So the book, in a way, is maybe gives hints to everybody who wants to combat this kind of right-wing Christianity, and we need to do that.
Well, I mean, in some ways, the title of the book is a little misleading. I mean, it is about I'm an atheist. I can speak from my atheist viewpoint. As I said, there's a lot of groups that are that intersect. I'm very much in belief in intersectionalism, where there's a lot of these groups, these out groups that intersect with atheists, but also those that are de facto atheist adjacent, which means that they tend to get lumped in with the non-believers. Oh, you're gay, you must not believe in God, and you're unholy. Or you're a woman who wants to have some degree of autonomy over her body, or wants to have some authority within her life without without the oppression of a church or a husband. All of these groups are in a way are potential allies. And I think we need to think that way, because as atheists, again, we're not a cohesive group. We don't have organization of our own. A lot of these groups do. They do have much more experience. The same thing with the BIPOC community. They have much more experience with oppression, and it's something that we can learn from, as well. So this is not just an atheist problem. This is much more of a anybody who's not in the in-group, the religious in-group, and that is, again, typically your hardcore right-wing Catholics and your politicized evangelicals and so on.
Well, there's the American Atheist Association. I've been a member for a long time, and there's a few others, I think, but I think they all need to unite against this threat from the right. You also describe religious traditions as orthodox or orthoprax, or some hybrid of the two. What does that mean?
Yeah, that's a great question, because if when you talk about orthodox, you often think about Eastern Orthodox religions and so on. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about it in its pure sense. Orthodox in Greek means basically approved opinion. Right, it's looking at the purity of opinion, and a lot of some religions fall extremely on that side. American evangelicalism, Protestantism falls on that side, because if you look at it, if you look at Christianity for instance, the only way to salvation is through belief. If you believe in Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior, you're in. You don't have to do anything beyond that. So it's very much an ideology. Ideology is really what's most important. If you look at orthoprax, which is basically right action or right practice, there's other religions that kind of fall on that end, which is, think of Judaism, think of Islam, where belief is not necessarily as critical as practice and tradition and rituals. You talk to a lot of Jewish people, and some of them are a little uncomfortable about talking about the nature of God or the nature of heaven. There's a lot of flexibility into how people think about that. But in terms of the practice, it's there's very strict observance that you need to and rituals that you need to perform. For Judaism, you have to pray 3 times a day. You need to abstain from pork and shellfish, and there's 613 mitzvot, which are basically laws that you need to follow in your daily life to be considered an observant Jew, at least a Jewish person, at least at kind of the extreme side. Same thing with Islam. Islam requires you to pray 5 times a day, facing Mecca, abstain from shellfish and pork. A lot of the similar rules as for women, to maintain their modesty. And then there's and every religion kind of falls somewhere within that spectrum, between the two. And if you look at, say, Catholicism, it's a hybrid of both, right? It's both, salvation is through both faith and good works. And there's a number of rituals, things like taking communion and so on. That's important to the Catholic Church. Now, I feel that that's so important is that, we oftentimes try to parse religions according to the specific sect, and we make, kind of, snap decisions based on that. Oh, evangelicals believe, or Catholics believe, and they don't all believe that way. And you can fall into some very nasty kind of rhetorical traps by thinking that way. But by kind of thinking about them in terms of orthodox and orthoprax, you really get at the kind of the practical differences there. So, if you're in a country that is dominated by an orthodox religion, again, such as evangelical Christianity, there's much more of an emphasis on ideological purity to go and try to control what children and what other people can learn and read, book burning, trying to take over school boards. That's very important in terms of trying to control thought. Whereas a religio-fascism in, say, a Muslim country, or in terms of what's kind of brewing in Israel right now, a lot of what is important to them is enforcing right behavior that women in Iran need to cover, or in Israel, they're trying to enforce that nobody can work on the Sabbath. Right, and that's what's important on that side. So the way that religio-fascism is expressed in different countries really depends on the nature of the religious tradition that's dominating.
Yeah, and I toured in 2011. I toured Iran for about a month, and I found that the people were much different than the government in attitudes. I had old grandmothers hug me and invite me home to dinner and so forth, and it was just, the people were wonderful, and they didn't care about the headscarves really. And some of them pushed them way back. They defied it. Yeah, as you know, they defied that. They don't really want that kind of theocracy, but they have no choice at the moment.
Well, you remember from my book too, is that my wife is Iranian. My wife actually survived the Iranian Revolution. Wow. She had friends that were killed next to her when in the streets when she was coming as a schoolgirl home from school. She remembers a time before the revolution where it was very westernized. They had McDonald's, they had women were covered, and then all of a sudden, 1978, through the early 80s, the religion descended. With the revolution was originally a hybrid between the religious and the socialists. Yes. Right. And there's always this thing. It's like, oh, we hate the government. Let's kind of have this kind of alliance of convenience, which is things that you see kind of in the U.S. as well between, say, Catholics and Protestants and moderates and radicals. But then once the government gets into power, guess what? They purge everybody on the fringe, become much more rigid in terms of their what they're believing and enforcing, and you end up with an Iran. And that's the problem too, is that religio-fascism is a continuum. You can, and I mentioned that we see religio-fascism here in the U.S. all the time. Things like religious freedom laws, that masquerade as, hey, giving people, freedom to express their religion as they want. Right. But it's really just a cover, particularly for conservative Christians, to bias other groups that they don't like. Right. Oh, basically, my right to religion involves oppressing others, basically denying gay people their rights, denying women the right to choose, or religious freedom laws can allow a doctor or a pharmacist to deny service based on their beliefs. That's religio-fascism writ small. And then there's this whole continuum, again, all the way to what you see in Iran today. And the problem is with when religion or a radicalized ideology gets a hold of the government, it's like a ratchet that becomes more and more radical over time, right? Until it becomes, it becomes like the French Revolution, where it started off with noble ideas and ended up with, bloody terror that ended up, with the, overthrow of the leaders and the beheading of the leaders of the French Revolution, and it, instituted in, dictatorial powers under Napoleon. That's what happens with a religiously oppressive, or with a ideologically puritanical ideology, and particularly religion, because it's so deeply ingrained in people. It becomes much more potentially noxious than any other ideology.
We're talking to Martin Johnson. His new book is The Atheist Survival Guide, 35 Ways to Combat Religious Intolerance. And I think we all want to combat religious intolerance. One thing we want to talk about is gender differences. Why this emphasis on gender differences and the transgender and this fear of people being what they want to be? Why is that there, and how does it factor into the growth of atheism?
Well, I mean, you actually asking kind of a twofold question. One is about gender, and one is about gender identity. And let's talk about each of those to some degree separately. One of the concerns that I always have is that, if you look at those that have abandoned the church, the nuns, men and women at equal levels. If you look at Pew Research, I think it's about if you look at how the breakdown of nuns, it's like something like 52% to 48% women, right? Mm-hmm. Men to women, which is fairly even split. But when you think about atheism, those that have embraced the atheist moniker, the difference is quite a bit different, with far fewer women
really
adopting that. And I think there's a concern there. If we're as atheists wanting to grow our numbers, we really need to embrace everybody and provide a big tent for all groups. And
sure.
The challenge is that we often say that religion is rife with misogyny. Right. But the thing is with religion, while it's oppressing women, basically saying, oh, you need to be under the thumb of your husband, and your husband, in traditionalized Christianity, that the woman is subordinate to the man. At least they have, historically, women have gotten some degree of their identity from religion. Religion has said, okay, so you're going to be oppressed, but you have a place in society as the kind of upholder of religion in the family. You're raising the next generation of good, moral, faithful children. And in some cases, women are given some degree of power. You look at the abolitionist movement, you look at the temperance movement, they were run very much by religious women, although it didn't necessarily threaten the male hierarchy.
Right.
There's a place there. The problem is that on the atheist side, there's also misogyny, right? If you look at if you think of what if people kind of close their eyes and think of an atheist, what do they think of? They think of some guy playing, Dungeons and Dragons in their garage, or some high tech guy. Somebody who's, in some cases, a little bit, I don't want to say immature. It's a caricature. It's not necessarily something, but there is some degree of truth in it. In that, if you look at a lot of atheist organizations, they tend to be male dominated. And the idea is that if we want to provide, sort of a more welcoming environment for women, and for groups that are not white males, and that's the other stereotype, that we need to at least change, if not the reality, change the perception of atheism being that way. Because it's like, what impetus is there for a woman who's oppressed by the church to, I'm going to become an atheist and experience the same degree of oppression without kind of a formal a place in that organization. And I think the other thing is that, again, women and a lot of and this kind of gets at what you were asking about, gender identity as well. Again, they provide a perspective, a needed perspective within the atheist, the atheist community, if you can call it that, about understanding oppression, how to understand how to fight oppression, because they've spent centuries or millennia dealing with that.
So we're almost out of time. But what do you think is the main thing you want people to take away from reading your book This is Martin Johnson, The Atheist Survival Guide, 35 Ways to Combat Religious Intolerance. And by the way, the people I talk to, when I tell them I'm an atheist, they say, well, yeah, me too, really. They're quiet atheists. They're all, often women. They just don't want to stand out or be picked on or whatever. But deep down inside, they know there's not much, they don't see much sense in the beliefs. But anyway, what's the main thing you'd like people to take away from the book?
Well, I think twofold. One is that as atheists, we're not alone, and we shouldn't think of ourselves that way. And we have a responsibility to, align with and defend those that are atheist adjacent, the gay community, women, the neurodivergent community, which I belong to. All of these groups, provide much more strength in the face of religio-fascism. The other thing is, and just in general, we need to kind of build our own kind of. You've heard of critical race theory. The idea is that racism is rife within our legal system and so on, and needs to be extracted. We really need a critical religious theory, same CRT, where we need to recognize that religion and religious bias is rife within our legal system and our linguistic system. And we need to rip that out long term if we really want to, transform society in such a way that religio-fascism becomes a non-issue, something that we don't have to be concerned about.
Well, thank you, Martin. By the way, you can purchase your book on Amazon. Is that right?
Correct. Both paperback and Amazon Kindle. Hopefully soon there'll also be an audiobook version.
Oh, wow. You're going to read it yourself? That'll be interesting.
Definitely myself.
It reads very well. And so congratulations on your book. We're talking to Martin Johnson, and his new book is The Atheist Survival Guide, 35 Ways to Combat Religious Intolerance. Thank you, Martin. Thank you for getting up so early on the West Coast there.
Thanks so much, Tom. Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay. See you later.